Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial arts channel. Today we'll be talking about the internal martial arts dueling etiquettecy. Now, many years ago I've made a Patreon exclusive video on this. The reason it's Patreon exclusive is because I included a short clip of myself doing an actual duel in Beijing. The reason I'm doing another video on the dueling etiquettecy is because this is going to be essential knowledge to understand a series of videos I'm going to make next. So firstly, we'll need to talk about the context. So obviously nowadays, especially people who don't engage actively in fighting, they might not be aware that when you fight somebody, there are damages, the potential risk for damage. If you look at any professional ring fight, afterwards, both parties, no matter winning or losing, most of the time, they both have bruised eyes or have cuts or be bleeding. Sometimes the nose breaks. They might have massive swells. So fighting is a risky business, right? Obviously, if you do it for a ring, you make money, so everything's great. But if you're not doing it for the ring and not getting paid for it, then you don't really want to suffer, a month of recovery and injury every time you fight someone. And secondly, back in the old days, there are no protective gears. We don't have gloves, there's no headgears, stuff that amateur fighters wear. So the protection is far less. When you're fighting with somebody with bare hand, with his fist or palms, you have much higher risk to get injured rather than if you have gloves on, which severely lowers the amount of injuries you can sustain from a fight. However, fighting is essential within the old school Chinese martial art community. A lot of times people have disagreements, they have grudges, they have all kinds of problems. And to settle these problems, they end up fighting and what we call a duel, where two people agree on a certain condition and they duke it out to see who is better. But they want to do that, right? Because that is required by the social and cultural norm to see who's better. But they don't want to suffer the injury because you don't want to duel someone and end up having to lay in bed for a command to recover or have your face looking like a pope. There's a lot of problems that they don't want to have, and also, all these injuries can potentially lead to career-ending consequences in some severe cases. So the context requires the Chinese internal martial art people to come up with a way that they can tackle this problem without suffering the negative consequences as much as they would have if they just duked it out. And obviously now, in modern day, we can just have a friendly sparring, right, where we lightly tap each other, where we don't, go full out. If you go to any of the MMA schools, boxing schools, when you're doing sparring against your fellow, practitioners, you don't go full out. You do light sparring. And that's a great way of learning the distance, timing, reaction, correct technique, all of that. But that is not good enough in the traditional Chinese martial art community for dueling, because in a friendly sparring, it's very difficult to tell who's actually the winner. A lot of times, let's say I hit him first, but because it's light, I didn't knock him out. And then as a result, I tagged him, and then he then hits me. And then I think I won, but he thinks he won. And there's no way to determine until somebody actually get hurt. That's why, in professional fighting, you either get submitted or you have to get knocked out, or you have to submit, right? Otherwise, you won't really know who. Obviously, in the end, if no one has been knocked out or submitted, then the judges vote. But voting can also kind of be inaccurate. So with all these problems in mind, the internal Chinese martial art community in Beijing came up with a solution. Now, before I talk about the solution, here's a caveat. Okay, so this solution is not universal. So not everybody does this. And personally, I only know that the Beijing people does it, and a portion of people from Tianjin does it, because Tianjin is heavily influenced by the Beijing martial art culture. But in other places like the South or in Shanghai, they may or may not do this, and they might have other dueling etiquettecies. I'm only talking about the one in Beijing. Even in Beijing, not everybody does this, but this is one of the more predominant dueling etiquettecies. So Now let's talk about this etiquettecy. So basically, when two persons agrees to have a duel to see who is better, or to have a disagreement, they want to see who's accurate, who's correct, they will first decide whose turn to go first. And that is usually determined on a verbal agreement. So if I think I'm in a more senior position, I usually let the junior guy make his attempt first. And if we are of similar ranking, then we'll probably look at age or other influences. And sometimes, one person will choose the time, other person will choose the place, and then the next person would then choose who to go first, or they might even, flip a coin, roll a die. There are many ways to determine who starts first. But it's very important that one person makes an attempt first, and that person has 3 attempts. So he has 3 attempts to attack me, and every attempt consists of one technique. So one technique is a little fuzzy, there's no clear cut, but basically I think of it as one combo. So he makes one attempt, usually 3 moves, while one combo in Chinese martial art, internal martial art usually has 3 moves, but it can also have 4 moves or even up to 7 moves. In Wu Xing Tong Bei, we have one particular combo that has 7 moves. But that's about as extreme as you can get. Now naturally you might think, the more moves you chant into this, the better, right? You have more chance of success. But you have to remember, the human body has a kind of limitation. Like I can't move in peak speed and power for extended period of time. Which is why even if you look at modern combat sport, people don't just infinitely hit punching non-stop, right? They will usually have a point where they'll be da, and then they will back off, or they will take a break and move to the side. No one just keep dishing it out non-stop. So there is a physical limitation to an efficient combo, right? If you drag longer than a certain amount of moves, you lose stamina, you lose power, you lose speed, and it becomes inefficient. That's why usually a combo is designed to have 3 or 4 moves, but like I said, it can go up to 7. So that is one attempt. And the person will have 3 attempts, and should he fail those 3 attempts, then it's my turn to make 3 attempts. There are also times where people will agree that you make one attempt first, I'll make an attempt, then you make another attempt, I make another attempt, and then fill out the 3 attempts per person. Now let's talk about what this attempt actually entails. So in the traditional internal martial art community, when we have a duel, you basically stand in a relatively close distance, and you are not allowed to move back for no reason. What that means is, if he, for example, there's a P, right? I'm allowed to basically evade it, but I can't, for example, when the moment he moves, I just sit back. So that's not allowed. The moment you excessively retreat is considered a loss. So I'm allowed to basically, for example, evade that P and then come back with a retaliation. So so if he does the P, I moved out of distance, I come back and hit him in the face, it's considered a win for me. But if he does a P and I take a 3 steps back to totally distance myself from him, that's a loss for me. So this is basically to prevent people from abusing the system, right? Every time he does a move, I just run away and I come back and then deplete his 3 attempts. So that is not acceptable. On top of that, when he's making his attempt, I'm also allowed to counter. What I can't do is when he starts to make an attempt, right, before you make an attempt, I hit him first. So that's not allowed. But the moment he starts moving, then I can also move and make retaliations or counterattacks. For example, if he's doing a P, I can basically do that and hit him. So I don't have to evade it, I can also counter it, or what we like to call, break it apart, basically have a solution to his attack. So you're allowed to either stand where you are and break his attack apart and retaliate, or you're allowed to step back, to evade the attack and then come back. But you're not allowed to run away from a duel. So anytime people distance themselves too much from the other person, it's considered a loss. And once he made his 3 attempts, and I neutralized it, then it's my turn to make an attempt. if every time he made an attempt, not only did I neutralize his attack, but I also retaliated him and he couldn't stop my retaliation, it's considered a win. And usually when that happens, naturally we know who the winner is. Although in some cases, the other person would still want me to make my attempt just to see if he can neutralize it. But generally speaking, if he made 3 attempts and I neutralize all 3 of them, then clearly we both know who is superior. And obviously anyone who's watching would also know, and that settles the debate on who's better or whose theory or technique are superior. But like I said, there are also times where after he made his attempt, he wants me to make an attempt and I can also make an attempt. So that in a nutshell is the internal dueling etiquettecy that we practice in the Beijing martial art community. Next, let's talk about the solution to this etiquettecy. So now that this rule is set up, right, how does internal martial art capitalize this rule set? Because everything that we do, whether if you do boxing, if you do MMA, if you do Muay Thai, there are a set of rules, and within those rules, there are an optimal solution to have the best result within that rule set. So the same for the internal martial art dueling etiquettecy. There is a type of approach that basically has better result. And basically the general solution, right? Again, every internal martial art style is slightly different. Every lineage is slightly different, and each practitioner is slightly different. So this isn't something that ever do exactly like this. But the general idea behind the base solution to the problem is that firstly, you want to not telegraph how you're going to attack. So they don't fight like this. Right? So they will have their hand usually down here. And this is a very interesting thing. And I've talked about this in a previous video about how a kid's game encapsulates the essence of internal martial arts. If you haven't seen that, do check that out. But in a nutshell, I don't want to telegraph my attack. So if I'm holding my hand here, then obviously it's much easier for him to predict where my punch are coming. While this isn't a problem if you're in the modern sparring context, because you'll be sparring for quite a little while. But if I'm only allowed to make one technique, 3 move type of combo, right? Well, I'm limited to 1 attempt. The moment I start, till I stop, then that's it. Therefore, I want to maximize my advantage of the unknown. Therefore, I put my hand down here, so you can't really tell whether I'm going to go from the bottom, from the side, this side, or from the top. It just makes it more surprising, almost like a surprise attack. So that's the first thing, and that is why, if you really think about it, in internal martial arts, then you can't pinpoint each style to a specific combat stance. What do I mean by that? So if you look at boxing, right? I mean, obviously there is like there's the Philly shove, there are the TriEssence peekaboo. So there are like different type of ways to hold your hand in boxing, but there are like general styles, and there's a lot of people who adopt this style or adopt that style. So you can kind of pinpoint to a few major stances when people do boxing, or like back in the old days, like the old Russian boxing, right? So there are like kind of ways where people would hold their hand a standard optimized way. You look at Muay Thai is similar, right? People have this stance where they sit at the back, they have their hand here, so that they can do the kick, do the knee, do the leg check. So there's like a trend of how people would stand when they fight. Same with karate, depending on the different reels or different organizations, they all have their optimal stance. So a lot of the external styles have it too, but internal martial arts, they do not, right? If you really ask like, what is Tai Chi's combat style? No one really knows, because everyone might give you a different answer, but the fact that no one has the same answer would have indicated that there's actually no actual answer. Everyone just don't know. That's why they just make up their own answers. If you ask, what's the combat stance for Xing Yi? A lot of people would think this is San Ti Shi, but that's actually just a stance training. You don't actually walk around fighting like this. And same with Bagua, right? People naturally think Bagua, you fight like this. Again, that's actually just the training stance. It's not how they actually conduct fighting. Yiquan is probably one of the exceptions, because it does somewhat have a fighting stance where they basically hold the hand either this way or that way. But even then, right, I've met etiquette masters in Beijing who doesn't have that stance, and he thinks the stance is down, and he actually engages combat with his hand down here. So you can see that in all these styles, and Wu Shi Tong Bei as well, my personal Wu Shi Tong Bei master, he also engaged combat with his hand down here. So you can see that it's a common approach in internal martial arts to not have a default combat stance, and they don't hold up their hand. One reason is for the dueling purpose. Another reason is obviously even in real life, a lot of times when the conflict happens, they prefer to surprise the guy, almost like a sucker punch. They don't want to, if we have a conflict, right, like we, not happy about something, the moment I take out my hand, he's gonna know, and then he's gonna start reacting. So I don't actually want that to happen. So I'll have my hand down here, we have the argument, and when I find a reason, I'm gonna hit it, right? So for these two reasons, internal martial arts don't really have an actual standard combat stance. That's the first thing. And the second thing, internal martial arts don't want to step back a lot. So they have techniques where they would take one step back as an evasion, but they will immediately come back. They don't have things where they will move around. And also as a result, they don't have very flexible stepping. Again, each one is an exception. It does have more flexible stepping, but again, that's because the Yao lineage in particular had heavy influence from boxing, so they kind of changed it. Also, by that time, which is the end of the Republic era, into the communist China, dueling has become somewhat limited and much less engaged than the late Qing to the early Republic time. So that's why, they started having more diverse steps. In the more traditional time, not saying that Taiji, Baguan, Xingyi don't step, but they have more what we call singular steps. So they don't have like a whole combo or they circle around the guy. So they don't have that kind of step. It's more like, if he's making a straight punch, he's gonna make one side step and hit him. So the reason why they have more singular sudden steps is again because I'm only trying to deal with one attempt, with this one technique. I'm not trying to dance around him for a 5-minute sparring session. So as a result, internal martial arts stepping is somewhat limited comparing to modern combat. And lastly, they want stuff or techniques that are the master key concept that I've mentioned back in the days, which means I don't want a specific counter for a specific technique. I want something that can cover everything in general. So for example, right, the previous example I gave is the circular hand. So this is like a counter. So when he's making an attempt, so no matter what he does, right, whether he's doing with this hand or with that hand, I've already made a video about it that you can check. But the general idea is that I can use circular hand on this hand, I can use it on that hand, I can use it if he does a hook, and if he does on the other side, I can also try to catch him on the inside. So I can safely use this in most occasions, right? Even if he does like a P, I can sort of side step and then try to hit him in the face. Now they adopted these combat methods that are general. So something I can just blindly go into a fight and just use it without having to judge what the person is doing. So when you're judging a person, usually you need some the distance, right? So especially if I don't know his habit of combat, usually in the modern fighting context, I will basically distance myself and then see what kind of approach he likes to do. And the next time he does it, I want to read the tail and then predict what he's going to do and then counter it. But in the traditional internal martial art dueling context, you don't have the luxury of feeling out your opponent. The moment he moves, the game is on. So it's almost like we need to fight blind, right? We don't know what to expect. So that way, it's almost like we have the gamble. Imagine we both roll a die, and then we hope that we have the higher roll. That's the kind of concept. So circular hand is a good example of it. Another is, for example, I'll just come up to a guy, I don't care what he does, the moment he moves, I'm just going to peek, and then hoping I'll cut anything out from him, and then and I'll hit him, for example. So all of these things are designed for this specific way of combat. This is also why they're not good at chasing people, because in this dueling context, you're not supposed to run away. So therefore, imagine, right, when I do a P, he just runs backwards. See, I don't have any way to chase him, right? I can't keep running after him and then hit him. That's not how internal martial art is designed, because in the days, in the heydays, this is not how they conduct combat. Obviously, there's also the mirrors more of the realistic combat scenario. But obviously, in the ring today, people they can run around, the octagon.
Kick again. Oh, he's chasing him. Oh!
But in a real life context, it's very seldom do you do that. If you can run, you don't really have to fight. So a lot of times when you have to fight, you can't run. And also, space is limited, so you kind of have to make do in a close range. And that's also why kicks are not favored in internal martial art, because kicks generally require distance and distance control. And the moment you start stepping back and trying to kick someone, it might just be considered a loss. Now, due to all these constraints, the most optimal solution to win a duel within this context is basically to have very hyper-focused short combo, right? So in a moment from a neutral stance, I need to explode, dealing a lot of damage, breaking his balance, upsetting his defense, and then hitting him. So it's in very short bursts. It's not designed for dragged out sparring or fighting session. So the whole idea behind internal martial arts is you go from 0 to 100. Everything happens in a burst and as unpredictable as possible. So next, we're going to look at just a few real-life examples to give you a better idea of how this dueling thing works. So firstly, I'm going to talk about my Wuxi master, right? Master Chong Deshun. And he had this duel, I think this was back in 2007. I'm not exactly sure of the date, either 2007 or 2009, I'm not too sure. He had a duel with my old Baiyuan Tongbei teacher called Zhang Xinbin. So this duel was instigated by Zhang Xinbin. He wanted to see how good Master Chong is. So he invited Master Chong to his house, and then he basically made the suggestion of having a duel. And they had a duel in the living room, right? And in China, living room is not big, so the whole space is about this size. It's the space that the camera can cover. It's a relatively small space. There's there's still like a table, small table that they drink tea on, and there's furniture, so it's not a lot of space to work with. They just have this space. You maybe take half a step back, and that's about it. And Master Chong considered himself a senior, so he led Zhang Xinbin to make the moves. Zhang Xinbin makes the attempt, he neutralized it, which technically makes him the winner. But Zhang Xinbin wanted to see what would Master Chong do, right? Because what if Master Chong makes the attempt, he can also neutralize it, and that would make them a draw. So he's hoping for a draw, so he asked Master Chong to make an attempt, or 3 attempts. So when Master Chong made his attempt, what he did was that they were both standing here. He first made a fake move to basically go from this side, right? So he's trying to go from the left, his left side, as a side attack. And when Zhang Xinbin saw that, he stepped right. And then when that happened, he expecting it, this hand then come across here as a P toward him, which caused Zhang Xinbin to block. When he blocks, he was able to then weigh on this, and then the third one got him on the neck. He didn't hit him for real, but he basically put it there. And he's only able to hold back because the whole engagement is short and controlled, right? If it's like a drawn-out fight, then it's very hard to always hold your attack and not hurt the guy. But because he had one attempt at the time with 3 moves, it was easier to know when he won, when he has won. And when he done his 3 moves, other guy also can no longer hit back. So once he's here, the other person can't then hit me and then claim the victory. So that breaks the rule. So these are all rules set in place for it to be some kind of fair competition to see who's better. So this is one example, right? So let's just run through that again. So he hit him there, and then he went there, and then there. Now obviously, for the whole thing to work, you need internal structure and all of that, right? But when he does this, it's very heavy, which is why Zhang Xinbin could block it, but he couldn't resist it. His whole body got pulled, which making the third attack unable to block. That's one example of how this dueling actually played out in real life. Another one is basically my personal experience when I visited Master Chong for the first time. He again asked me to make an attempt, so I did. Well, 3 attempts actually. So I went with a punch because I wasn't sure what he does. I just want to taste the water first. Right? So I went with a punch because I had 3 attempts. The first I just want to see what kind of reactions he has and what kind of stuff he do. And then my second and third attempt I can maybe then have a more focused solution to whatever he does. So and he was again standing like this. And when I did my first punch, which is the other hand, when he did that, he basically just took a small side step and go ha, and then he placed his hand here. At that moment, as I've mentioned in my previous video, my entire arm went down, and my neck was it felt yanked. At that point, I know that I couldn't continue that attempt. He literally snapped me out of whatever I was planning to do next. And given the impact on my arm, I also realized that I don't really have a counter for him. So I foregone my second and third attempt. But again, instead I asked him to make an attempt, not because I think we're going to make a draw. At the point I already know he's way better than me. But I just want to see what kind of attack that he would do. Okay, so I basically asked him to make an attempt, and I basically held some kind of like an E-Chuan stance. And what he did was, so you pretending to be me, right? So I have some kind of E-Chuan. I thought, saying like this, I'm kind of well covered. So whatever he does, I'm going to be able to fight him with my structure. And again, he came out to me, he did what we call the dan shou, what appeared to be a dan shou. And when I see that, I knew what to expect, so I wanted to resist it. And then his dan shou then came into TriEssence, so it ended up being like this. And then the second hand was here. I also knew that this hand would come because I've done Tongbei before. I just don't expect this type of power. So my hand was here. And as he does that, then he placed his punch on my wrist. And then by then I know, again, I lost. And I lost knowing sort of that combo that he pulled. Right? When he did this, I was expecting this combo. But this is one of the most well-known combos in Wuxing Tongbei. Well, in Beijing Tongbei as well. So I'm expecting that combo, but I still couldn't stop him. And at which point, I know 100% without a doubt, he is a lot better than me. So that's another way, another example of how these duels play out in real life. And thirdly, when I visited that Yi-Chuan master, Wang Yang Lao Shi, right? That was many years ago. I think it's 2012 when he hit me on the rib that caused me a month of injury. He basically also said he was standing to me he was standing sideways. He was do whatever. He was also holding like that, and then I kind of again I went in with a punch to just kind of taste the water. And what he did was he was standing like this. When I went in with a punch, he basically just went like this and built up his structure I just couldn't break through the structure. And as a result, he basically just went like this and he pushed me right to that side of the room. But that's another example. In this case, he won purely by superior structural force. But again, it's from the neutral stance, and then it's a very general movement. He's not specifically doing something. Basically, whatever I do at that moment, he will just step in and take my center structure, and because he have better structure, he will just push me off balance. So these are just examples, and hopefully from these you can get a better idea of how dueling works within the traditional internal martial art community in Beijing, and how this sort of somewhat prevents unnecessary risk and injuries, and still able to kind of determine who is better, so long as both parties are objective. Obviously, if there's a sore loser, it becomes messy. But generally speaking, the two participants would know who is better. And next, let's just look at the pros and cons. So, the pro of this, like I already said, it minimizes injury. It's a somewhat friendly way and technical way to determine who is superior. So I do prefer this when I engage in dueling within the Chinese martial art community. The con of it is obviously that sometimes people can manipulate rules, or they basically set traps that makes this contest unfair. Another thing is that this don't always reflect a real life outcome. So a person who's skilled in this might not do very well in actual sparring or in an actual fighting session, right, where there's no limitation to how many moves you can use. Because, for example, if I'm standing here, I'm trying to do a P, and then the other guy is from modern combat sports, so I'll do a P, he basically just run back, and then he'll come back with kicks and other things, and he'll try to dance around me. So against a opponent like that, this approach don't work as well, which is why the traditional internal martial art people, even the limited few that can fight, they probably will not do well against a modern combat opponent within a modern context. So that is the common of it, and sometimes I might lose a fight if I'm limited to the space and the amount of moves I'm allowed to use. But when I do end up dragging the fight out, the other guy might have less stamina or doesn't know how to counter low kicks. There's many other possible influencing factors to the outcome of the fight that is pretty much being taken out of the traditional internal martial arts way of dueling. So it doesn't really reflect an overall wholesome solution to the problem. However, with that said, and it's still useful as an indicator of real life conflict. Because like I said, in real life, a lot of times you also don't have the spacing you require for a proper fight. A lot of times, like if it's like a road rage, I get out of the car, like how are you driving? They don't see the red line or the indicator broken. It's like right here. And if that fight, and if that immediately escalate into a fight, I'm not gonna get up to a combat stance and then try to gauge something. The moment I feel something wrong, hit him and then elbow him or whatever. So it does mirror a more accurate real life conflict, but it doesn't quite does it in the proper modern sparring context, right? So that is the pros and the cons. Right, so I hope that has made sense to you. And just like as I said in the beginning of the video, it's gonna be important to make sense of the follow-up videos that I'm gonna be uploading. I hope that you also find this interesting and also gives you a better understanding of why internal Chinese martial arts function the way they do and why they're not fighting like the modern combat sport or like some of the external Chinese martial arts. If you do find this video interesting, do consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And if you can subscribe to my Patreon support channel, that will be much appreciated. As always, a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for your support. And as always, feel free to message me at any time for any questions on existing content or suggestions for future content, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching TriEssence Martial Art channel, and I'll see you next time.